The next very important thing in the local administration menu is the closed dates editor. Holidays and scheduled closures, which includes if your library is closed on a Sunday regularly, that is a scheduled closure. Holidays and scheduled closures should be entered into the system as early as possible. Unscheduled closures should be entered as emergency closures. We'll look at that interface in just a second. I tended to take 1 or 2 days a year when I was in the position to do this, where I would sit there and I would have something nice to drink by me that was appropriate for the policies of my library. And I would have a comfortable chair, and I would shut out the needs of, as much as I could, of everything else, and I would just enter closed dates for as far out as I possibly could, and for as long as I had the energy and the attention to be able to do it. Sometimes I might actually get 18 months out as far as the holidays go, and 9 months out with my Sundays because we were closed on Sundays. And sometimes I'd get like 6 months out and then I would have to go in a little bit more often. It is not, it is super easy, but it is also in some ways very tedious at times. But holidays and scheduled closures must be entered manually by a local admin. Closed dates result in no materials being due and no circulation fines being assessed, so that's why they're important to have them. They also will shift grace days. You have that 1 day's grace period after an item is due when that is applicable. Excuse me, my nose just started itching. So this has been updated a little bit from before. It now is in the new language, Angular, for the web client that we're slowly transitioning all the elements to. You're going to be selecting your location if it is different from what is already showing based on your workstation setup. And you have a date filter here. Then the options to refresh or add a closing. So if you're adding a closing, it's going to open a modal where you will select the library that it is appropriate for. You have the option to apply it to all of your libraries, depending on your permission level, your working locations. And then what type, is it a full day or is it a multi-day? If it's a multi-day, it's going to, well, I'll show you in a second. You're going to select the date and then describe it in some way. It's Thanksgiving, it's Sunday, it's the Founders Day that your library closes for every year. And then you'll have the option to select if it is an emergency closing. So maybe this is snow day, in which case that would be an emergency closing, and then process immediately. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then okay, and it will then be reflected in those closed dates. So you have the option to do multiple days as well, which is going to give you a range, and then detailed, which would also include some more. Let's actually pop into the interface real quickly. I want to see if, check your share and see if you can, nope, you can't see that. Okay. There we go. Now you can see what I'm doing there. We'll get back into the staff client real quickly. Go to the local administration menu, close dates editor. I'm going to add a closing. I'm not actually going to add a closing, but I'm going to look at detailed, and then you have the ability to actually select times when you might be closed that are going to be outside of your library's hours, which are, those are established by us here based on when your library is actually open. So I'm going to cancel that, scoot that out, and get back to this and get this out of the way. There we go. Get my controllers back up here. So in this example, you can see that there was an emergency closure that was indicated in that modal. It was an ice storm. And then you have the option to process those things. What that's going to do is it's going to look for those items that were marked as due during that time when you're closed. And it's going, any of those things that happened because you were theoretically open but then couldn't happen because you were closed, it's going to do its best to process those and then have it updated for your patrons. In this case, there were no circulations or holds or anything, but it would be reflected how many out of how many processed after you did those process immediately for emergency closures. So keep in mind that there are times when we have to close that go outside of our normal schedule. Those need to be processed as emergency closures. Another reason that you may process an emergency closure is if you forget to add in your close dates in a timely manner so that they are extended far enough out, and then for whatever reason the computer doesn't recognize that you're supposed to be closed on Sunday, and it has some items that come due for a patron. Those ones that are within that due date range for patrons, once you go in to add those in, they need to be added in as emergency closures and processed so that they can be updated and act appropriately for your patrons.